good evening, and I'm so glad to see everyone tonight. No matter how many we have, it's just a pleasure to worship with you and to be able to worship our King specifically at his feet. So, tonight our songs are all about God's faithfulness, and as Pastor Josh shared on Sunday, today's Tuesday, on Sunday, it feels like it's been a really heavy week for so many different reasons, right? Not just, even the things that we as a church family are about, but the things that our church families may be dealing with. And so tonight we're going to be singing about God's faithfulness and how great he is. And so you might not be seeing that in your own life right now. It might be something that you're singing because you know who God is, and he doesn't change, thankfully, right? Thankfully, it's not, some days he's good, and some days he's faithful, and some days he might love us, right? That he always is good, and he is always faithful, and he always loves us. And so if that's really hard to see right now, I just encourage you to sing it as you would be singing it. Like if you could picture yourself just singing it at the throne room, like at his feet, that you just as an offering. Lord, I don't know how this is true, but I know that it's true. It doesn't make sense that it's true, but I know it's true, right? Because you are faithful and you are loving God. Father, so we offer these words, Lord, that these would not just be words of our mouth, Lord, but they would just be our heart cry, Father, that we would know you and see you as faithful, Lord, that we would know you and see you as provider, Father, and not just in the things that we are looking for, Lord, but the things that we don't even expect to see from you, or the ways that you might be moving and delivering to us your promises, Father, because your promises are yes and amen, even if it doesn't look like it. It is your ways, Father. So, ladies, we welcome you to stand with us and worship. The altar is always open if you just need to, pour yourself out, or at your seat, you're welcome to. We just invite you to stand and worship with us tonight. So.
He
to see everyone. And we have a few quick announcements. Lots of exciting things coming up here at Crosspoint. I almost said the point, like some sort of nickname or something. I don't know where that came from. So we have a few things. Ooh. If you haven't already, get your rodeo tickets. That event is on Friday, March 18th. And that is $30 each. And those tickets will be on sale as long as we have them. Right now, we still have some for sale. Can't guarantee they will be available until the day of, though, because we are selling out. So get your tickets quickly. So that's exciting. Even if you just want to come for dinner, like I'm not participating. I'm just going to be watching and laughing. So I'm not going to be on that mechanical bull thing. But what a good chance to support all of our missionaries. So another missionary fundraiser that we have the opportunity to participate this year. So also, if you ordered a cheetah shirt, they should be here within the next 2 to 3 weeks, depending on, of course, shipping and that kind of fun world stuff right now, as well as the sweatshirts, so the hoodies. So they will be here around the same time. So fingers crossed, sooner than later, please, Lord. So we have a lot of people excited to see those. So, yeah, it's good to see everyone tonight. Hi, ladies. Hi, online ladies. Good to see you guys, too. Hopefully you caught your notes. They are posted, and then we'll get tonight's notes ready to go. So I think that was all the major things. Oh, yes. If you are ready to sign up for the women's conference, we have, and if not ready to sign up, I mean, you should, but save the date for Friday, April 1st. It is not April Fool's. We will be totally having a women's worship night Friday, April 1st. And then Saturday, April 2nd at 8 a.m., 8:30-ish. The doors will be opening, and that is through until like early afternoon-ish, somewhere around there. But that sign-up is available, and then you can pay. If you are paying, make sure that you note Illuminate. So you can put Women's Illuminate if you want, but Illuminate is the name of the conference this year. So that's kind of our theme. Super excited for the women's this year. It is the theme of, just letting our light shine. And we'll be talking a lot more about that on Friday, April 1st. I'm excited to share the word that night. So it's been a long time coming that we were supposed to do it. Gosh, I lose track of time. November of 2020. And unfortunately, COVID wrecked that. So I'm excited. It's been, I don't know, for such a time as this. I really believe that. So are we ready for our lesson tonight? So we'll get to our notes and buckle up because it's another. Oh, so I was so excited because, again, I know we talked about this last week, but, what we're singing is straight from the Bible. And if you're not singing, please hear me respectfully, but the worship songs that we sing are not just fluff, right? It's not just someone's, inspiration or the feels or whatever. And not that there aren't, time and a place for those kinds of songs, but the worship songs that we're singing are, straight from the Bible. So we did it tonight on purpose. I don't know if you caught it. You're welcome. At the beginning of Do It Again, it says, walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall. That no doubt, the people that were of Nehemiah's time, maybe having to rebuild some of those things. But so we'll talk about that tonight. So without further ado, our friend Ange. Yeah.
Thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight. And thank you, ladies, for leading worship, too. It was so good tonight. And I'm so proud of our young adults for helping us out and filling in the spots and just... It's not easy to stand up here and sing. I don't know or even stand up here and teach. It's not easy to get up here and do anything, period. Ask anybody that does it. It's not easy. So thank you guys for serving. I appreciate it greatly. And Gabe, who has disappeared, but, we appreciate the one Gabe who showed up and played guitar for us. Thank you, Gabe. So Thank you, ladies, for coming tonight, and I'm excited. We cut back a little bit on the amount of reading that you all had to do for the couple of weeks. You'll notice that there are fewer for this week, and that's mainly because I want you to get the meat of what it is that we're reading and not feel overwhelmed by having too much to read. So we did cut it back a little bit for this week. That being said, if Anne-Marie or Alexis, if one of you could put up the She Reads Truth slide, please. So She Reads Truth, you can get that, their app, you can go onto their website, or listen on any listening platform. The one I choose to listen on is Spotify, and the one for this particular lesson, all of the books that we are reading like through the next couple of weeks are kind of shoved into one. So we are spreading out the teaching here a little bit further because it was sort of like taking a drink from the fire hydrant, and we kind of felt like it was a little bit too much. So we broke it down a little bit further. It's week 3 of She Reads Truth, studying the Old Testament with Liz Curtis Higgs, and you'll see that they don't quite go as in-depth with all of the books on this one. It's just kind of like a taste of each. So if you do want to go a little bit further in depth, there's another podcast that you can listen to, and I've been doing a lot of research as we are digging into these books a little bit further, and a really good podcast that we've used for some other things in the past, they even have some videos on YouTube, is the Spoken Gospel podcast. And these guys are great. They're really fun and very, very, very informative. So I used theirs on Nehemiah and Ezra for tonight. That's what it looks like there as some of the basis of what I'm teaching. But if you want more even than what I'm going to teach tonight, take some time to listen to these guys. I listened to it like 3 or 4 times, and I still feel like I could have probably taken in some more. So it's a lot of history. It's a lot of whys. And they also take it a step further and really look at how Nehemiah and Ezra point to Jesus, which I love that too. But we're going to look at the New Testament hopefully in the fall. So I'm trying not to overwhelm you with that right now with the flipping around between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So they do talk about that some too, but again, take the time to listen. If you have it, it's definitely worth it. Okay, so without further ado, tonight we're going to look at the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So initially, Ezra and Nehemiah were one book together. And in our Protestant Bible, it is split into 2. You'll notice some similarities between the 2 books. But the interesting thing that I learned about them that's different than some of the other books is the story is not exactly told consecutively. So as you're reading these 2 books, you'll see that they kind of jump around all over the place. And they're a little bit hard to follow because there's king this and king that, and this thing happens and that thing happens, and it doesn't happen in order. So you sort of have to pay attention when you're reading to keep up with these 2 because they're kind of all over the place. But what you need to do and realize is that we are not reading a chronological Bible right now. So even in, the way the Old Testament is laid out where Ezra and Nehemiah fall is not exactly timeline oriented because the Bible's not laid out in a chronological order. And these 2 books are historical books, so they're telling you history and what happened in history. Where we left off last week, if you would recall, the Israelites have been taken into captivity. They've been exiled. Another interesting tidbit that I learned as I was studying this week was that there were a couple of different nations, if you will, who did these capturings, I guess is a good word, these conquerings. And they had some different styles of conquering, which I didn't know this before. This was new for me. So remember how we talked about in 1st and 2nd Kings that the kingdom split, right? The kingdom of Judah went north, and then the Israelites, that had Jerusalem, went south. The reason that this is important is because there's 2 different types of conquering that happen of these 2 nations. So the north, they were conquered by the Assyrians. And what their style of conquering was, it was kill, 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 and kill some more. We're going to annihilate a whole nation and wipe them off the face of the earth so that they can never come back against us again. Okay, so that's the Assyrians in the north. Then you have the Babylonians that do the conquering in the south. Now, the Babylonians are the ones that destroyed Jerusalem and killed the temple, got rid of the temple, decimated the city. The difference with the Babylonians was they were not so much about kill, kill, kill. They were more about, I'm going to make you like me. So assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. And we will learn more about that as we get into some of the prophetic books later on, like the book of Daniel, the three boys in the fire. You probably might be familiar with that particular story if you've read any of the Old Testament stories at all. They were in Babylonian captivity, so their names got changed. They were made to eat the things that the Babylonians ate. They were made to worship the Babylonian gods, all of those kind of things. So they weren't killing them off. They were just trying to get rid of their culture to make them like them. What we see at the beginning of Ezra and Nehemiah is something even different yet. And it's kind of interesting because it's what causes God to work. And it's where we see God's faithfulness and how he takes care of his people, right? So you see at the beginning of both Ezra and Nehemiah where it talks about King Cyrus. Now, King Cyrus, he was a Persian. And the way the Persians went about conquering a nation, they said, okay, you do you, right? So King Cyrus, allowed Nehemiah and Ezra, with his blessing, to go back and rebuild. But the reason that the Persians did it that way was they were like trying to get their fingers in all the pots, right? So they would let this nation over here go and do their thing and worship their God. And maybe that God was the right God, so he would bless the Persians. And okay, we're going to go let the Israelites go do their thing, and they can pray to their God, and maybe their God will bless us. And then there's this nation over here. Okay, we'll just let them go do their thing, and they can pray to their God, and maybe their God is right, and his favor will fall upon us. So instead of trying to just bring them all under one God like the Babylonians, or do away with them altogether like the Assyrians, they were like, we need all the favor. So, if you put your fingers in the pots of all of them, maybe like one of them will be right. So they kind of just rolled the dice and let everyone do their own thing. So that was what's interesting about the Persians. Go ahead and do your own thing, and hopefully it blesses us in the midst of that. So I thought that was interesting, too. That was a new thing for me, too. Okay, so there's 3 different characters that we will look at that are very important in these 2 books. The first one is Zerubbabel. I'll give you a second to write that down. You can just write him down as Z. There are really not a whole lot of Z names in Ezra and Nehemiah, so you'll know it when you stumble on it, I promise. It kind of sticks out. Zerubbabel is the one that we learn about first. And chapters 1 through 6 of Ezra pretty much focus on what he did. Now, what you need to understand is that there were 2 different waves of exiles that went back to rebuild Jerusalem with the favor of King Cyrus. The first wave went with Zerubbabel, and what they were trying to do, it was pretty decimated at that point. It was all wilderness. It was dangerous. There were other cultures floating around that were trying to just defeat anyone that would want to build Jerusalem back up. So it was a dangerous scenario. There was nothing really safe about going back to try to build this temple back up. And at every turn, one thing that you'll see consistently throughout Ezra and Nehemiah is there is always opposition, whether it be to building the wall or to rebuilding the temple or just simply to going back. There is always opposition, and they have to fight against and defend themselves against that opposition. So Zerubbabel, he goes back to rebuild the temple, and he fails. He only gets the foundation built. You'll read about that in Ezra 2. He lays the foundation only, and like I said, things were bad. There was a lot of distrust from the surrounding nations because, wouldn't you be distrustful too if there was another nation coming in trying to rebuild something on where you've been for 60 years not doing anything and leaving them alone? So it was a very unsafe kind of atmosphere that they were in. And then we have Ezra come onto the scene. about 60 or 70 years later after Zerubbabel is what scholars kind of assume or hypothesize. And Ezra, the book of Ezra, is the perspective it's told from is a priestly and educated scribe perspective. So he knew what he was talking about. He knew how to write. He knew how to read. He'd been educated in the best courts. They estimate or they guess that he probably was in the Babylonian classroom and had learned all kinds of languages. And keep in mind that Israel had been in exile for 70 years about. With Ezra, they call that the second wave that returns to try to rebuild the temple. So there's a second wave of exiles that are like, okay, we're done with Babylon. Let's move back to Jerusalem and see if we can rebuild it and rebuild the temple. What Ezra does is he calls the people back to following God's laws. So you'll see in Nehemiah, and we'll look at it in a second, where Ezra is reading the book of law to the people, and they're weeping and mourning openly because they have been living the ways of the Babylonians. Because they don't know any better. And they've been marrying foreign wives. They've been worshiping foreign gods and just doing things that were outside of God's word, which, of course, had consequences to it. So the thing is, he calls the people back to following God's laws, and it's not always friendly. It's not always kind. So as they were living in these foreign cultures, what they did was they married those cultures' women. And unfortunately, Ezra called them to divorce those foreign wives and to return to marrying Israelites. That probably did not go over very well, I would imagine. And as you can see, if you will read these passages this week in your readings, you'll see that some people were for it and some people were not for it. So the ones that were not for it, they went back to exile. They went back to Babylonia. Because that's not an easy word to hear. Nehemiah, the next book, was set in the same time period as Ezra. So Nehemiah and Ezra were doing things hand in hand. What Nehemiah calls the people to do is to rebuild the walls of the city. And what you'll see in the readings that you have this week, I was pretty deliberate in picking them out. One of the readings you'll see where they talk about building the wall with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. So a trowel, if you've ever laid brick, is what you sling the cement with, and then you put the stone down, then you sling some more and put the stone down. So they'd have that in one hand, and then they'd have their sword at the ready on the other because they were being attacked pretty regularly. People did not want them to rebuild this city, the surrounding people. So you'll see where it was still very, very unsafe for them as they were rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. A lot of times, Nehemiah is taught as a leadership book, and that was how I first encountered Nehemiah. And if you've ever talked to me about kind of my testimony, I would tell you that Nehemiah was, and this is strange, I know, Nehemiah was like the book that I kind of got saved on. I know it sounds strange, but the camp counselor that I had who really talked about Jesus a whole lot, she studied Nehemiah with us in the cabin and just showed us how the book of Nehemiah pointed back to Jesus and how because we follow Jesus, we are then called to be leaders who are called to rebuild the walls and the foundations of our faith as well. So just a fun fact about me, Nehemiah was probably one of the first books of the Bible that I read in completion and in its wholeness, all the way through. You read verses here and there as a kid, but I think that was probably the first book that I ever picked up and read the entire thing and did an actual study of it. So I kind of like Nehemiah a little bit, kind of attached to it. Other interesting thing that I like about Nehemiah is he was just like you and me. He was a commoner with a normal job. You'll read in the beginning that he was just a cupbearer to the king. And one day he goes into the king's court to test the wine, which is what cupbearers did. They would take a sip of the wine before the king, and if they happened to drop dead, then the king knew that that was not safe wine to drink. I don't think I would want that job, right? So that was his job. So every day he would go in and test the wine that was given to the king and make sure that it was not poisoned. That was his job. So one day he goes in and the king's like, "Why are you so long-faced, dude? Typically your countenance is pretty happy. You're usually pretty okay. Why are you so sad today?" And he says to the king, "Because I've heard that my city, The city of my people has been destroyed, and it's laying in ruins, and there's nothing I can do about it. The king, because God turns his heart towards the people of Israel, then blesses Nehemiah with all this stuff, all the things, like anything he could possibly need to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, because God turned that particular king's heart towards the Israelites and then gifted them and blessed them with what they needed. So Nehemiah was then faithful to take those things and rebuild the city. It's just kind of interesting and neat. If you turn to Nehemiah chapter 8, chapter 8, verse 10, that's the one that I was referring to earlier. We'll take a look at it. I'm sure you probably have heard it before. This is where we see Ezra and Nehemiah line up with each other. It says, I'm actually going to read a little bit before verse 10. Nehemiah chapter 8. And I'll read the beginning to you, and then we'll go to verse 9. So at the beginning, this is what it says. All the people are together, and this is what Ezra does. It says, when the seventh month came, and the Israelites had settled in their towns, all the people gathered together at the square in front of the water gate. They asked the scribe Ezra to bring the book of the law of Moses that the Lord had given Israel. On the first day of the 7th month, the priest Ezra brought the law before the assembly of men, women, and all who could listen with understanding. While he was facing the square in front of the water gate, he read out of it from daybreak until noon before the men, women, and those who could understand. All the people listened attentively to the book of the law. Then it goes on to just name off a bunch of different people and families. And then verse 9, it says, Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites who were instructing the people said to all of them, this day is holy to the Lord of your God. Do not mourn or weep, for all the people were weeping as they heard the words of the law. Then he said to them, go and eat what is rich, drink what is sweet, and send portions to those who have nothing prepared, since today is holy to our Lord. Do not grieve, because the joy of the Lord is your strength. And the Levites quieted all the people, saying, be still, since today is holy. Don't grieve. Then all the people began to eat and drink, sending portions and having a great celebration, because they had understood the words that were explained to them. So what I find interesting about this particular chapter is these people had probably never heard the word of the Lord read to them before, and because, there was nobody to do it, nobody to teach them. And so Ezra and Nehemiah step up and they read it to them, and they mourn because they're like, oh, shoot, like we weren't obeying any of this stuff when we were living with the Babylonians. Like, what are we going to do now? We clearly have lost the favor of God. Like, maybe that's why we don't have a city. But what Nehemiah and Ezra teach them is like, no, we're going to reinstate the Passover. We're going to reinstate the celebrations of the Israelites that cause us to remember what God has done for us. And then we're going to continue celebrating those things so that we don't forget again. And that's why they encourage them not to weep, but to rejoice, because this is a holy day of the Lord, because they're returning to the Lord and not running from him any longer, or not separated from him any longer. Unfortunately, what's the pattern that we've seen time and time and time and time again? And what is the pattern that we too sometimes tend to follow time and time and time again? Nehemiah had to actually go back to Persia to serve King Cyrus for some other things. And while he was there, he caught wind that everything that he had done, everything he had reinstated, was fallen short again and was no longer being obeyed and was no longer being done. They'd allowed it to be polluted again by some of the foreigners that were around. And he returns and he loses his temper and he tears things down and he gets angry and he does what he can to try to restore it again, but it doesn't happen. And so this book, like I said, is not chronological, so it's kind of all over the place. But when we get further down into the prophetic books like Malachi and Hezekiah and some of the other prophetic books that we'll look on later down the line, they explain what happened in those times and how there's just a stop. Like at the end of the Old Testament in Malachi, the Israelites, the Jewish people, they don't hear from God like at all, zero, for like 400 years till Jesus comes on the scene, because there's no more prophets, there's no more anything. They don't hear from God. He's just quiet, silent. Like they go and they go about their business, but they don't hear from him anymore. But we'll look at that a little bit further along the line. So just kind of what I want you to keep in mind as you're reading this week is, what does it look like for us to remember God? Because these two particular books are all about remembering God's faithfulness and doing what he's called us and asked us to do. So he calls Nehemiah and Ezra. He calls Ezra to teach the law, and he calls Nehemiah to rebuild, and he calls Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple. What does it look like to walk in faithfulness when God calls us to do something specifically to build his kingdom and to walk with him, is what I want you to think about as you're reading for this week. So that's about all I have for you tonight. Take some time, like I said, to listen to the podcast this week at some point or another. They're both really, really awesome. You'll benefit from it. It's good stuff. But that being said, we're going to try it a little bit different this week, how we split up our groups. Online ladies, discussed amongst yourselves. Amory, do you think we could just do 2 groups since there's not as many of us this week? Or, okay. So we're going to count you off by 1s and 2s. So I will give you a number, and remember what number you are, okay? Okay, 1s, go ahead out into the foyer. 2s, you'll hang out in here. All righty.